Welsh chapels have been described as the national architecture of Wales. They're found in every part of the country, and even, where the Welsh diaspora flourished, in parts of other countries. They are a testimony to the long history and strength of non-conformist religion in Wales. By the mid-19th century, 3/4 of the Welsh population at least were non-conformist, and by the early 20th century the Anglican Church was disestablished in Wales. Chapels are therefore without question Welsh, but most of them are in some ways also un-Welsh, borrowing their style consciously or unconsciously from the many parts of Europe. In abandoning their vernacular roots for something more showy, they raided the architectural dressing-up box and put on foreign clothes. They are also, in the most part, architectural dinosaurs, facing a catastrophic extinction event. This short video is not an attempt to explain the whole history of the Welsh chapel, it's just a rough guide to why they look like they do. The first chapels were converted barns or cowhouses, simply fitted out with a pulpit and box pews. They formed the pattern for later chapels, with the long wall being used as the entrance, a style which was eventually overtaken by the gable entrance style. Most Welsh chapels fall into one of these two groups. The long wall chapels, that were not subsequently altered to gable entry ones, held on to their vernacular style and avoided the more showy fronts of the later chapels. They have 2 doors to facilitate the flow of people coming and going at the start and end of services. They were often enlarged by raising the roof and adding a gallery, usually accessed internally, but also sometimes via external steps. Constant rebuilding and enlarging was the sign of a successful congregation, and as a result of the spate of revivals of the mid to late 19th century. Date stones like this are a way of boasting about a chapel's growth. Chapels were usually enlarged to the back, raised in height and refenestrated. The round arch window was typical of most chapels. The round arched windows were adopted to make an obvious distinction from domestic architecture and from church architecture, where the pointed Gothic arch was the norm. The bulk of them, whether rural or in towns, have wooden Florentine tracery. Italy, despite being Roman Catholic, provided the style source for many Welsh nonconformist chapels. Lombardic architecture was extremely popular, but taken out of its original sun-drenched setting and recreated in Wales, often in concrete, it becomes something altogether different. It wasn't adopted in a scholarly way either. It was just an inspiration, and usually only surface deep. Welsh chapels were more often than not planned with great care on the facade, while the other 3 walls were plain. In rural areas, limited funds were behind this. In towns or built-up areas, the sides were often not visible anyway. Another important Italian influence was the central arch, based on that of the Church of San Andrea, Mantua, and adopted by the Reverend Thomas Thomas, a North Walian minister and chapel designer. This became a standard feature of many chapel fronts in the later Victorian period, though usually somewhat flatter than in the original. Ancient Rome provided inspiration for urban chapels in South Wales particularly. The Lammer Street Chapel by George Morgan of Carmarthen is one of the best, with its Corinthian portico. Greek designs were popular with Baptists, not least after the hugely influential Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon advocated it for the Metropolitan Tabernacle in London. He said, "It is a matter of congratulation to me that in this city we should build a Grecian place of worship. There are 2 sacred languages in the world, the Hebrew of old and the Greek that is dear to every Christian's heart. The standard of our faith is Greek, and this place is to be Grecian. Greek is the sacred tongue, and Greek is the Baptist tongue. We may be beaten in our own version sometimes, but in the Greek, never. Every Baptist place should be Grecian, never Gothic. Wesleyan Methodists, who were, after all, part of the Church of England until forced out, didn't have a problem with Gothic in the main. Some of their places of worship were not very different from Anglican churches, at least on the outside. The Calvinistic Methodists, on the other hand, who were stronger in Welsh-speaking areas, preferred the subclassical styles of the other Welsh-speaking denominations, and Welsh-speaking Wesleyan Methodists played it safe and stuck to the same styles. In the late Victorian and Edwardian periods, a kind of free Gothic took hold and was popular with many denominations. The interiors of all these chapels were intended to be a place where preaching could be heard at its finest. Acoustics were a high priority. Flat ceilings were therefore the norm, often with a central ceiling rose in plaster from which a chandelier was suspended. The position of the pulpit was key. The earlier chapels sited the pulpit in the centre of the long wall, with windows near it, so the preacher could be seen. Early pulpits were like Anglican ones. Later they became larger and were sited on a platform. This allowed for multiple preachers. Preaching festivals where combined congregations could listen to hours and hours of sermons were very popular. Sometimes they were held out of doors because the numbers attending were so great that they couldn't be accommodated in the chapel itself. The growing number of people attending chapels meant galleries were added to existing chapels or built as standard in new ones. Cast iron pillars held them up, and being slim they did not interfere with the view. Seating was raked in galleries to allow for maximum visibility. Even chapels without galleries could have raked seating. Below the pulpit was the big seat for chapel elders. This area in Baptist chapels was often the site of the baptism pool, positioned so everyone could witness this important occasion. Smaller rural Baptist chapels made do with an outside tank, or even a nearby stream or river. Unlike Anglican or Roman Catholic churches, these chapels do not have an altar. A simple wooden communion table served the purpose and was sited in front of the pulpit, not on the end wall as in a church. As chapel membership grew, chapels were, as previously mentioned, rebuilt, and new chapels were built. The series of great revivals led to the greater provision of seating. Chapel builders could order the parts for their chapels from catalogues, and improved communication and transport meant ironwork grills for galleries, for example, could be ordered from Glasgow. The local carpenters still played, as they had always played, an important role in the construction and fitting out of chapels, but the majority of internal ironmongery and plasterwork was imported and assembled on site. Chapels thus began to look more uniform than in their early days. Chapel architecture did not change much over the decades. The pipe organ was one element which was new. As choral singing became more popular and chapels got bigger, a harmonium was just not loud enough for some buildings. New chapels were planned with organ spaces, usually on the end wall and above the pulpit. Some had four-sided galleries with a space for the choir here too. Chapels that retrofitted organs often had to put them wherever they could fit them. Chapels were usually a single-celled building, with porches perhaps, but otherwise just a square or rectangle. However, as chapels became community centres as well as places of worship, the requirement for Sunday schools and vestries meant that they were extended or had buildings tacked on later. The last great revival burned itself out in 1905. The First World War had an effect on chapel membership, with many members lost on the battlefields. The confidence of congregations who envisaged the need for huge chapels with ever-expanding congregations was misplaced. Throughout the 20th century, the memberships slowly dwindled. There were once over 6,000 chapels in Wales. The number is going down all the time. Their very ubiquity counts against them. A limited number are listed. Some hang on precariously with only a handful of ageing members. The many denominations in Wales which cause the proliferation of chapels means also that chapel sharing is not considered as a solution by many members. They often have long family ties to their chapel and they want to hang on to it, but maintaining it is expensive. Chapels have been sold and repurposed as housing or for commercial use, but too many stand abandoned and rotting. A tiny number have been preserved, but the fate of the rest is bleak. Little by little, they are vanishing from the landscape. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video about Welsh chapels interesting. If so, please remember to click the like button. And I have a playlist about Welsh chapels if you want to find out more and see some individual examples. And as always, thank you for watching. Diolch am wylio.